Hello, everybody. Welcome to She Said, She Said. I am Lena Stagg, the co-host of our podcast, She Said, She Said. I'm also the author of the Recipe Records cookbook series. You can find Recipe Records at www.lenastagg.com and check out all the fine recipes. And there's a couple of children's books in there too, which I think you might enjoy. I am happy to be here with my esteemed bestie, Jude Sutherland Kessler, the author of the John Lennon series, and she's going to tell you about her brilliant offer out there and this beautiful piece of work that she has published with our special guest.
Yes, I am. I am so excited to be here. I'm Jude Sutherland Kessler, Elena's trusty sidekick and football buddy. And our football season is getting ready to start. We couldn't be more excited. Well, I could be a little bit more excited if Joe Burrow wasn't not seriously, but injured a couple of days ago. But such is the life of football. That's the way it goes. But I wanted to share with you the books in Lena's Recipe Records series. This is for all of you 60s people out there, and I'm assuming if you're watching this program, you like the 60s. This is all the food your mama used to make. Fun, shake a tail feather kind of recipes and playlists, song lists that you can listen to on your, Alexa. I won't say it because she'll chime in. App, and just ask her to play those songs while you're rattling those pots and pans, and you will have a magical time in the kitchen. This one I kind of keep under wraps because it's about those scalawags, the ones, the rolling scones. Let's spend the bite together. And this has great stories about the Stones, some very sad, some very happy, and some just in between. And all of the titles, all the recipes like Feast of Burden and Hot Stuff are Stones themed. They're great, delicious, and a lot of fun. And this is the original Recipe Records. It's a big old book, and it's full of recipes themed from music from the 1950s up to the 1990s. Great recipes. And then the one that we all love, the tribute to the Beatles. It is, you get stuffed Sergeant Peppers, so many good recipes and great stories about the Beatles, Beatles trivia, all kinds of playlists. You're absolutely going to love it. So look into that at lenastagg.com. And I am the author of, if you're looking behind me, you're like, John, and more John. Oh, yes. The John Lennon series, which has totally consumed the last 36 years of my life and will consume, I hope, a lot more. I am halfway through a 9-volume series on John's life, and maybe 10 volumes, because we had to split the last book in two because it was getting too thick. And people were going to get carpal tunnel from trying to hold it. So we broke it into 2 parts. It's probably going to be 10 books. We're up to 1965 in the newest book, Shades of Life. And I'm working really hard on Shades of Life Part 2. The boys are in studio. They're making Rubber Soul. And we're getting ready to conclude 1965 and hop into 1966. But over the last year, I had another wonderful, exciting project. And I don't get excited about a lot of stuff. I'm kind of a more pessimistic person than optimistic. And Lena probably saw for the first time in the 11 years or 10 years that we've been best friends, she actually saw me get excited about something. It's like, this is so good. It's so good. But I worked for a long time last year with a brilliant person who is our special guest today on an audiobook of this whopper of book in the John Lennon series, She Loves You. And Lena, tell us about this guest who will be appearing with us today.
Well, this very special guest was the narrator and voice actor for Jude's book, and his name is Scott McKinley. And Scott also has narrated 2 volumes in the Arizona Homicide Files, which is very scary, by Renee Winters.
Mhm.
He also is a voice actor on such podcasts as Madison on the Air, Project Audion, and Narrator Radio. Not sure if I pronounced that right, but that takes classic radio plays and recreates them on the air for the listener. He is also the voice of Spared and Shared Audio, where newly found letters from the American Civil War are heard for the very first time. That's very, very intriguing.
And I got to know him through this book, award-winning book by Jay Bergen, who was John Lennon's attorney when Morris Levy sued John because John halted the distribution of the Roots LP, which Levy took John's raw, unpolished recordings that he was going to turn into the rock and roll album. And he made them into this LP unsanctioned called Roots. And when John stopped distribution, Morris Levy sued him. So this book is about Lennon, the mobster, Morris Levy, and the lawyer, Jay Bergen, who wrote this book, who was John's attorney. And Scott sent me a copy, a redemption code for a download of this book, the audiobook. I was not into audiobooks. It was not my thing. I started listening to it and I went berserk, because not only was this new material about John Lennon that you haven't heard before. I don't care how many books you've read on John Lennon. This is all new material, brand new. But our guest, it's great. Our guest voice acting of John Lennon, and Lena can tell you, I kind of go insane when someone impersonates John Lennon and they don't do a good job, whether they're in a tribute band or they're doing a voice. Like I kind of lose my mind a little bit. And I'm very picky. This is John Lennon. So I contacted him and said, would you also be able to do the other Beatles? He said, oh yeah, I do the other Beatles. Can you do Brian? Yeah, I can do Brian. Okay, big pause. Can you do Cynthia? Because that's hard. And he's like, I think I can do that. And long story short, we are here today to welcome the man who did the audiobook of She Loves You, the one, the only, Scott McKinley.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Welcome,
I'm
Scott.
honored.
You have
Thank you, Lena.
such a great voice. Even your only voice, your own voice.
Well, thank you. I try to be at least clear, and hopefully that'll come through in the narration of the audiobook.
Yeah, you did
well as
such
I
a good job. And I have to say, there are people in Jay's book that, besides John Lennon, which is had to be intimidating to do someone that's so well known and
It
so
was.
singular, you know. But you also did Judge Grisey, who was a very special character, was a classical musician, but was very open to listening to stuff about rock and roll. And also the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Shertman,
Yes.
who mumbled. That was great. I loved that. You did such a good
That's
job.
right, sure. Yes. And well, thank you. It was really fun to do that book.
Well,
had,
the product that you guys created has turned out to be magnificent, and everyone that listens is just blown away by your talent. So we're so happy to have you on She Said, and I know you're a very busy man. So thank you for coming and sharing the evening with us. So I have a question to start out with. Whenever whenever Jude met you and she began singing your praises and was so excited about this potential project, when looking at Jude's books, so she has several volumes in the John Lennon series. You guys started with volume 3 as your audiobook. So can you tell us why you started with the
with volume 3?
magical number 3?
Yeah, we talked about it first, and we both agreed to start with volume 3 because of a couple of different reasons. One of them was anniversaries. So all the events in She Loves You take place in 1963, as well as the beginning of 1964. And those are the 60th anniversaries this year, as well as next year. So we thought for the release of the book, it made sense to start off with something that would trigger memories and things. Plus, that's really where all the excitement really starts to kick in, especially for US audiences, because that's just where everything that's been building for the first 2 books really just jumps forward. And because of that, Jude and I discussed what to do with trying to fill in, because we weren't sure when we might go back and do volumes 1 and 2. So Jude agreed to write some exclusive content for this book, the audiobook version of it, in order to do sort of a prelude of what happened in the first 2 books, so that the listener is brought up to date and doesn't feel like they're missing something. They won't get it in the detail they'll get if they buy the first 2 books, of course, or if we do the first 2 books, they'll get from listening to it. But at least they can catch up very nicely to it. It's well written, and it's a lengthy prelude, so you're not missing too much in the way of detail.
You get an hour condensed version of Should Have Been There, which, it's an hour long. So you're getting a lot, without going into the weeds, you're getting a lot of the story of Should Have Been There. And then another hour, which is Shivering Inside, volume 2. But I wish I could say I was really as marketing savvy as Scott makes it seem. I never, the thought of the anniversary thing never crossed my mind. That is brilliant. I'm not that. What I was thinking was, how the Greeks always began their stories in media res, in the middle of the action. And I thought, we're jumping into the heart of the action, the birth of Beatlemania. The Beatles get to go to the London Palladium. They play the Royal Command performance. They come to America. They go on Ed Sullivan. That I'm in a completely different world, like of the world of 1963. And I'm not even thinking about 2023, but that was a smart move. So I'm glad you were thinking about that. But I'm just thinking we're going to jump into the heart of the action, and then we can go back and put the legs under it at some point. But I think we're ready to move on to 1964, don't you? Next, to move on to that, to move to the next year. Well, Scott, you and I did all 3 of us did about 8 months of work putting this book together. And you had 85% of the work, if not 90% of the work, because you recorded all the chapters and all the voices. And I just did the author's notes. And let me say to people listening, you can skip those author's notes. If you don't want to hear me in the Southern twang go on about why stuff happened in the chapter, like the reason this is this way is because Bruce Pfizer said this, and Mark Lewison said this, and Hunter Davies said this. And if you don't want to know all that, skip, and I'm out of there.
I wouldn't put yourself down. I mean, I think your voice is wonderful.
Thank
and
you.
It's so personal, and the notes are personalized, so that if you have an opinion about sources, for instance, you aren't afraid to voice those opinions as opinions.
Right.
And because of the personal touch, I just thought it made sense that you read some of it, especially because you're savvy around doing things like podcasts.
Yeah.
And it was nice to have a different voice break it up. I really do like the source material. Now, it's not like you're reading the index. It's not like you're reading footnotes. You're reading endnotes or chapter notes. quite a different thing. And when you have interesting things to relate about it, like 8 different stories that make up what happened when, especially with all the mythology
Yeah.
that's been published over the last 60 years, just amazing how many miscommunications there have been.
Oh, just Paul's 21st birthday,
Yeah.
which started out in the early days in the 60s. We heard that John beat Bob Wooler up. He hit him. He bruised his face. His collarbone was hurt. It wasn't broken, but it was hurt. That's what we heard. By the time that we get to the 1990s, John is picking up a shovel. I mean, the story just changed so much. And so I talk about all of the stories, all the reports and the year and when they happened and who said what, who copied from this person, who exaggerated the truth. And we finally get to the root of the story. So that's kind of what the author's notes are all about. Now, Rand wrote and recorded original instrumental music, which you hear in the book. And then we found this group of young men from New Jersey, the Black Ties, who I swear are the young Beatles. And they are they were at Fab Fest this last weekend in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a great, fun weekend for people. But I watched the girls, watching them and then grouping all around them when they came off stage. And those girls would not let them get to the dressing room. And I thought, gosh, this is the young Beatles. But they did 2 original songs that occur in the book as the Beatles going on their UK tour. You'll hear a little snippet of their music, and then they're on tour, and then music, and then they're in the next city, and then music, and they're in the next city. And it really makes it fascinating. But the bulk of the work rested on your shoulders, Scott. And I would say the most of the work, I mean, you had to do Paul and George and Ringo, but most of it, of course, was John. So tell us a little bit about the intricacies of voicing John. What quirks does he have? What do you consider when you're doing John Lennon?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not even sure I would have had the guts or the moxie to do this unless I had done Jay's book first. And Jay's book I auditioned for, and they specifically requested, his publisher did, that whoever had the role of narrator had to do the voice of John Lennon, and that it had to be a very good voice, professional auditions only, please, nothing amateurish. And I'm like, geez, well, I've never done Beatle voices in public before, but anyway, that gave me the background in order to have enough gumption, I guess, to try to do all of the Beatles for your book, Jude. I'm primarily a narrator. I enjoy doing nonfiction narration in addition to fiction. And I'm a voice actor as well. And even with a book like yours, nonfiction requires acting just as much as it does just somebody just reading it out loud. Because if you just have a reader, there's nothing there. There's no hook to keep the listener listening. You'll get distracted. And the audiobook's a long listen. It's not just an essay or a conversation. But so anyway, John Lennon. So his voice is sort of within my vocal range. And, I've done some accent training, but mostly I listen and I mimic. I do weekly script reads and workshops to try out new voices. And so getting ready for Jay's book, I tried to do that and stay in character voice. That's one of the things that really helped, I think, when I was practicing for this.
Yeah, I think you mentioned to me one time that you keep a picture of the person that you're acting, so where you can see it. Is that correct, or am I making things up?
I do like to have that surrounding me, just things. I do have pictures of the Beatles over here and over there. They have to be small because otherwise you get sound bouncing off of hard things inside of the vocal booth that I have. But mostly I keep YouTube clips of either a source that helps get me into the role, or if it's the actual person, a clip of that person talking, unless I have a mnemonic or something that gets me right into it, like I did for the Arizona homicide books,
Right.
the main person was from Texas, and I had a voice that I just was it Gene McLean? Yeah, sure, he's from Texas, and I just practiced that a little bit, and that got me warmed up. So I did the same kind of thing for John Lennon, just a bit of practice, listening to an interview or something with his own voice to help snap me back so I don't drift. That's my biggest fear for doing these, is drifting from one voice into the next. And that's what makes doing just a generic Liverpool accent hard, because if I just pay attention to the regular ins and outs of doing an accent, I'll start just sounding like Beatles. I have to find a way of snapping out of that. So it sort of worked for the rest of the book.
So can you do a little bit of John Lennon for us?
Yeah, I think I can. Let's see. I actually grabbed a little clip from your book, obviously, where he's talking about going on the Morecambe and Wise show with Cynthia. So he's telling her about what that was like. If you've ever listened to the Beatles anthology, Volume 1, they give a nice clip of them doing Moonlight Bay from there, and it's also on the anthology DVD. Although it's not the complete show, just parts of it, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, John is talking to Cynthia, and he goes, "They cut calling Ringo Bongo." Oh, I like that. Cyn tiptoed to reach round their beakers. I mean, the whole bit was somewhat scripted, as it were, and Morecambe and Wise tried playing it a bit straight, but we wouldn't have it. Meaning what? Cynthia was leery. Meaning at one point, Eric, Morecambe that is, he looks at me and says, "Oh, do you like being famous?" To which I sneered, "Oh, well, it's not like in your day, you know." You didn't. Cynthia's eyes danced as the kettle sang. She dished three hooping tablespoons of the Christmas mix into their cups and then poured. "Yeah," John smiled. "Then I gave him the old once-over, as if to say, 'You're old, Dad. You're warmed over.'" You didn't. I did.
That is great.
That's just a little snip of.
And that's Cynthia thrown in as well. I love it.
Yay.
I liked the way that I think John really liked Eric Morecambe. I've heard him talk a little bit in a couple of interviews where you could tell he's trying to do Morecambe's voice himself. And so I hope in the reading that I had done that I brought a little bit of that out.
Oh, it was great. You made me fall off my chair laughing. I mean, really and truly, I had so much fun reviewing each night when you would send us a chapter. Sometimes I
You
would
have so
laugh
many good scenes.
it would just, oh, you have a little dad.
Well, you only have a little dad, have you? One that the dad will remember. I like the way that John he has a thing for sort of a Lewis Carroll kind of sense of wordplay, a sense of humor, or just the sounds of the words, very Dylan Thomas-ish, if you remember the poet. It's I like the way that he always seems to turn to camera to break the fourth wall. One of the best clips I think I've ever seen is of I think was Please Please Me filmed. Where did that footage ever come from? That showed them playing in the studio. George clearly has a black eye.
Yeah.
And they're playing, and you see John Lennon strumming his guitar, and then suddenly he turns to the camera and goes,
Right.
and it's just, that's one of his things about his sense of humor.
Yeah. Yeah. And if he's ever going to say anything naughty, and he doesn't do it all the time, impersonators. It's not something he does every few seconds, but if he's ever going to say anything that he knows is bad, he will scratch his sideburn. It's a big tell, but he doesn't do it unless he's getting ready to say something naughty. Okay, Lena's going to kill us if we don't talk about.
Well, my favorite, George.
Oh, I love George.
So, George has a very thick Scouse accent. Tell us what you did to try to capture the importance of George in a John book?
Well, I've always liked George. I think I do George's voice best, naturally. I've always liked doing George. I like the thick accent very much. And I think my voice is the closest to his. So even though John was my favorite Beatle when I was a kid, I always thought I did a better George than I did John. And it's just, there goes my side of my voice. My face always goes up when I try to do George. Just that smile that he's got. And
So sweet.
yes, it just I had a little bit a clip of him, if I can read that.
Yeah, please.
Yes, please,
And
please.
it's the bit in the book where they're on the plane flying to New York for the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time, and he's being interviewed by a Liverpool reporter named George Harrison. So there's a reporter named George Harrison interviewing Beatle George Harrison, and he's a reporter, I think, for the Echo. And oh yes, yes. Well, as I was saying, the Echo journalist pressed the angle. What do you think your chances are in America? Well, when I visited my sister Louise over there, George gulped against his sore throat. Cliff Richard's movie Summer Holiday was so disregarded that it was playing as a second feature in this awful driving movie. Doesn't bode well, does it? The older man was honest. That's what I've been trying to say. George looked concerned. Ringo, too. Well, the reporter scribbled some notes and tried to think of something heartening. Perhaps it'll all be better than you think. We live in hope, Ringo chimed doubtfully. But deflated, George sat back into the seat. It's hard to be worried about one's looks, he thought, with the raging throat and the threat of sure and certain failure looming large. I might as well give up and grab a spot to keep. And drawing the thin airline blanket around his shoulders, he did.
I love it.
That's brilliant. Just brilliant.
I love the way that he delivered his lines in A Hard Day's Night. Those were tricky lines, especially well, you don't see many of these nowadays, do you? Oh, by all means, I'd be quite prepared for that eventuality. It's just a wonderful, weird line, and he pulls it off so well. So it's always a pleasure to do George's voice.
I have to
Thank
say
you.
that every time I heard you do George, I just smile from ear to ear. And I agree. I think your John is perfect. I couldn't even think of anybody who could do John better, but I think your George is your best. He is just, it's just so good. Okay, so Scott, before I met you for years, I would read my own stuff at the Fest for Beatles Fans, which is coming up August 11th through 13th. And
That's right.
People be there. It's going to be so much fun. So I would do my own, John, he was talking like this. And, oh, hello, John. Hi, here I am, Paul. And then one day someone says to me in the lobby of the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, okay, you do understand that you're supposed to be doing Paul and not Mickey Mouse. I think my Paul left something to be desired. Tell us about voicing Paul.
Well, you do as best as you can. Now, my voice was a lot higher when I was younger. And so for me, Paul was actually the easiest to do, just because I had more of tenor, a higher voice. And but now it's a little bit lower, and I've got a little bit older gravel at the bottom of it, so it's not quite as easy to pull off as it used to be. But yeah, you normally go up a couple of octaves, and but I had a little piece for Paul to read, if that's
Sure,
okay.
yeah.
All right, it's I can't remember where the interview was, but it was somebody, I think, who was a reporter who snuck in, or a reporter who was there but didn't quite know what he was doing yet. And it starts off earlier in the book. But diverted by the entrance of the third girl into the room, Paul hurried over to greet the fetching brunette. Hello, my dear. I'm from the South Wales Echo, the doe-eyed lad said. Would you care to give me a few details about yourself? The confident girl smiled appreciatively. She tossed her shoulder-length bob and met his gaze levelly. Boys, fashionably attired, in fact, dapper businessman popped his head into the room. You need to begin dressing as soon as possible. Half hour, you understand? Paul winked at the girl and then reluctantly returned to Walker. Don't talk to John, he stage whispered to the reporter. He's cultured. He makes all of his money by suing papers that give us bad write-ups. We're going to go to night school to get cultured like John. Philip laughed uneasily and chewed the inside of his cheek.
I love that whole
It's okay.
bit. The whole "don't talk to John" bit. They had that guy scared to death. That is so good.
Yeah.
Your call is great.
I'd have to think of a couple more examples where I can get more into the groove, but anyway, I do like voicing Paul. I just wish I was a little bit younger so that it could sound a little bit stronger still. But in the book, I think I do a really nice job. And
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. So what about Ringo's voice? So he, grew up in the Dingle. So I don't know if his accent was a little more difficult, or did his voice sound so similar to John's that it was hard to keep them separate?
well, it wasn't so much of a matter as it sounding too much like John. I just never thought I could really do justice to it. Plus, in my head, most of the time, I remembered a lot of dialogue from Ringo was from A Yellow Submarine, the movie. And of course, none of the Beatles did their own voices throughout the animation, although Ringo's got the lion's share of the lines, believe it or not. And the guy who does Ringo does him pretty well, but it isn't Ringo. And so anyway, so I was nervous about it and auditioned a little bit for Ringo for Jude. And somewhere in there, I can just, I think one of the ways everybody listens to the Beatles is by singing along to their songs. And I don't know about you, Lena, but I suspect, for me anyway, the songs I like the most are the ones I do the best singing along with. And the ones I dislike are the ones I can't do very well. But
Right.
for whatever reason, I actually thought I did justice to Act Naturally in Ringo's voice. So using a little bit of that,
Nice.
I tried to apply that to the audiobook using his voice here. So I have a little bit of
Very
a snippet
clever.
clipped out.
Very
You got to do
clever.
what you got to do to try to get a voice done when there are so many different voices in the book, and I can't spend
Right.
a whale of a time on each one focused. I did on Jay
Sure.
Bergen's book, just going through a ton of actors and things, trying to get the attorney, Shertman, trying to get his voice done, until I finally found an actor who was like, that's the sound I'm going for. I'll try to mash that up with something else and come up with my own voice for it, which is what I do when I don't have a guide vocal from an interview or something. But anyway, from an earlier chapter in the book, here's Ringo and Paul actually talking about not the Wooler thing, but Brian's vacation with John in Spain. He's weary of that gag, Ringo warned. Usually, Paul shot back defensively, John's the one dishing it out. You'd think once in a blue moon, the tables could turn and he could take a bit of what he gives. You think that's possible? George threw his eyes to the ceiling. You don't know Thursday from breakfast time. Yeah, Ringo agreed. John's not one for ring around the rosy, is he? Not even with Bob Uller. Good evening, one and all. Brian paused in the doorway. His hair was coiffed stylishly. His suit creased perfect. I don't suppose you're ready to inspire Liverpool's Beatlettes to wax nostalgic? Now, where's John? The standard pep talk fell away. The loo? Paul floundered. Yeah, he'll be right back. George joined in. Well, Brian glanced at his watch. I'll go have a word then with the stage crew, and John comes back and brushes past Brian.
See, that is amazing. I could never do that. If someone said, if you can read that and do all of those voices, I will give you a ticket to Liverpool. Still, I couldn't do it.
Well, again, it's a matter just of getting into it. And I get nervous and sometimes in front of the cameras and interviews and things. So thank you for making me relax enough to be able to do this. That really does help. And I love it when it's working and I'm saying the words and I can hear. That's one of the nice things about having a booth like this. I have enough equipment so I can hear my own voice the way it sounds to you as I talk. These aren't just headphones where I'm only hearing you and I can't hear myself talk. It makes all the difference for doing narration and to really try to match a voice as opposed to just trying to read evenly and nicely and kindly. So that's part of it.
Yeah, I never want a booth like that. I don't want to hear the way I sound. No, thank you. Keep me out of that booth for sure.
Well, the months and months that it took us to do the audiobook, Lena, the most part of it was editing the software, or I'm sorry, editing the audio files, the software to do that. That takes 4/5 of the time. Recording it takes a good block of time and it has to be really, really quiet. And I'm unfortunately recording in a house where people are living. And so I recorded most of this during the winter and had to turn off the furnace. So it's cold in New Jersey in the winter. And as a result, I had to do it in the middle of the night when my family was asleep, so they didn't freeze to death. Dad's recording, that kind of thing. My son works from home too, and he has a full-time job during normal business hours. So I couldn't very well freeze him out of the house while he was doing it.
It was a challenge. It really was. And we ended up working all hours and all colors, as we always say, because we just, we had to get it done. And we were up all night for sure working. But there were so many great surprises, Scott, working with you. One, of course, is how wonderful you were to work with. And you just, anything, you were willing to do it over and over and over and get it just right. You did such a great job.
It has to be right. It's your book. You are the definitive person to say, like, look, I'm not doing this for free. And it's, you have every right so that it sounds exactly the way you want it to sound.
Well, it was, and it is just perfect. I absolutely love it. But also how sweet both you and Jean were, and getting to add you guys to part of our family. We really love that. I think one of my biggest surprises was your Brian Epstein. I had no idea. Your Beatles are great. Your Brian is so. Will you show people a little bit of, if you just did Brian, but do you have another selection of Brian?
I don't have one prep, but if you give me just a moment, I can, from the first chapter. So I do have something lined up here.
It's just so spot on. And it's not an exaggeration or a caricature of Brian. It is absolutely, if I listen to him on YouTube and then I listen to you, I can't tell the two apart.
Here we go. There's a wonderful market just ahead, Brian pointed when John's eyes opened after a half hour or so. Scads of artisans, purveyors of hand-woven shawls, leather satchels and sandals, handbags, that sort of thing. Even a booth with miniature crocodiles if you're interested. Yeah, right, John set up. I'll bring one home to Sin. Brian's eyebrows arched in the center, his forehead wrinkling. A handbag? A croc, John smirked. I'll make short work of Mimi's cats, and Sin won't have to boil the fucking fish to feed him ever again.
I love it.
Amazing. Amazing. That was brilliant. truly. So Scott,
Yes.
I purchased the audiobook as well, and I have been listening to it, and I've been impressed with the other famous people that you have voiced in the book as well. So there is Sid Bernstein, Bobby Goldsboro, Trini Lopez. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
But you also voiced John's Aunt Mimi Smith and a famous Scottish photographer, Harry Benson.
Yep.
And on and on.
Yeah, Lena, it just, the list, but there were 183 voices. And the thing is this, they're not 183 voices that people don't know. Everybody's heard Cousin Brucey. You know what I'm saying? Everyone knows what he sounds like. And people grew up with Cousin Brucey. They know Tony
Mary
Barrow.
Kay, baby.
Yes, he had to get all 183 voices. This thing is huge. And one of my favorite scenes, Scott, is on the beginning of the Roy Orbison tour in June of 1963. Of course, you know, Roy thinks he's going to be the headliner. And then he flies into London and they are getting ready to start the tour. They're on the first night of the tour, wherever it was, I can't remember. And he sees these girls, like hundreds and hundreds of girls with banners that say, "We love you, Beatles." There's no "We love you, Roy." It's "We love you, Beatles." And he's like, "What's a Beatle?" And
What's
John,
a Beatle anyway?
yeah. And John happens to be standing there, and the conversation that follows is one of my favorite in the entire book. And so we are going to take a listen to Scott enacting Roy Orbison, John Lennon on the Roy Orbison tour in June of 1963.
It had begun rather eventfully. When the dark-haired Texas headliner arrived in Slough, just an hour or so before his tour's kickoff performance, there were crowds everywhere. Unruly girls with jiggling posters and hand-painted banners proclaiming, "We love you, Beatles," and "Beatles forever." Everywhere Roy Orbison turned, there were placards and crowds chanting, "Beatles, Beatles! We love the Beatles." "What's a Beatle, anyway?" Orbison paused inside the stage door. A young man with a bowl haircut tapped him on the shoulder. "I'm one," he said. "And you're?" "John Lennon, Beatle, rhythm guitar." "Well, girls love you forever, John." The holly Elvis-esque Orbison made quotation marks with his fingers and grinned at the almond-eyed boy. "Forever, or till you sing 'In Dreams'," John shot back. "Then I'm all but history, aren't I?" Orbison chuckled at the boy's droll sense of humor. "Well, nice to meet you while you're still at the top, then." Roy chuckled lightly, and the two loved stars eyed each other with mutual respect.
Okay, so how did you perfect the young Roy Orbison?
Well, I wouldn't say I perfected anything. I would say that I, again, have when I was younger, had a much higher voice, and so yeah, Roy Orbison wasn't well. It's a little high for me, but I could still, dream. I'm not going to do it, but. I would sing along to Roy Orbison, and I remembered how to do his voice from singing along.
I can't, that's a new thing for me to think about, learning to speak the person's voice from singing the person's voice. That never would have occurred to me.
Well, I love the Traveling Wilburys too, as I'm hoping you both do, not just Lena.
I love them.
And it was yeah, and we used to. Roy Orbison had a black and white VHS that came out in the late 90s. I used to manage a video store for a couple of years, and I had a really great staff who were so up on everything, books and music, quite an intellectual staff for a video store. And they played the Roy Orbison greatest hits these are kids back in the 90s really digging Roy Orbison. Played it over
Wow.
and over and over and over again. And I managed to grab the box set of Anthology by the Beatles. And, customers must have hated us after a while. We played so many Beatles things that I could.
That's cute. So one of the conversations I had with Jude a lot throughout the process, there were a lot of conversations, and I just was in awe of the work that both of you were putting in and Rand into this project. But I know we had talked a lot, and Jude had expressed that she was worried about recreating Cynthia's voice. And how could a man possibly do the voice of beloved Cynthia Lennon? And somehow you pulled it off. Tell us about.
At least I hope I did.
Yes, you did.
Okay, well then great. That's what I was hoping to. I found a little clip of Cynthia that somebody had taken and posted on YouTube, talking to Julian when he was a baby. So this
Oh,
would have
wow.
been around 1962 or so. Or no, he was born in 63. Listen to me. I don't know where the recording came from, but with her talking, and I could hear that little lisp in her voice. Most of the other interviews that I was able to find, which featured Cynthia Lennon's voice, were from much, much later, like in the 1980s, for instance. So there's very little of what she sounded like when she was younger, when she was still married to John. And as a result, it was a little bit hard. But as soon as I heard that lisp, I just, just used that a little bit as I went through the dialogue.
You really nailed it. And the thing to me that you have to be an actor to do this, because there are many very sexy, flirtatious scenes of Cynthia and John. I mean, Valentine's Day, she's in the, she's with him, and she ends up flirting with him, and they end up crawling back into bed. It's Valentine's Day after all. That's got to be a kind of a difficult thing to do. You were very coquettish and flirtatious and pulled it off. The whole thing was you just did a remarkable job. There's not anything that I would say I would change. I really appreciate all the hard work you put into it. And it's just, I don't go around saying, read this book, it's great, it's remarkable. I never say much of anything about it, but
You should, it is.
Your work was really, really good. So to give you guys an example of Scott doing all 4 Beatles and a room full of reporters and doing different voices for the reporters, we're going to listen to a clip of one of the Beatles' very first press conferences and just listen to the intricacy that he has to make come to life and jump off the page. So here we go.
Flanked by police, the Beatles moved steadily towards the International Arrivals building. Albert and David Maysles, 2 Bostonian brothers hired by Granada TV, the North of England ITV franchise, to cover the Beatles in America and furnished with small handheld cameras for the task, moved beside them, filming the progress of the Liverpool group. As flashbulbs and comments continued to pop, Somerville could feel the heat rising on the back of his neck and beads of sweat gathering on his bald pate. He flexed his jaw and counted to 10. "Ladies and gentlemen," he was louder now, "this is ridiculous. If you won't be quiet, we'll just stand here until you are." "Cheer up," John barked boldly, taking control. "Shut up. Just shut up." Somerville was right behind him. The photographers looked askance, and seizing the moment, a keen young journalist fired away, "Are you a little embarrassed by the lunacy you cause?" "No, it's great," John grinned unabashedly. "No," Paul seconded. "Marvelous." Ringo threw a hand up in jubilation. George had to laugh. "We love it," he admitted. "We like lunatics." John coyly launched the inevitable Mickey-taking, and the game was on. "You're in favor of lunacy?" A second reporter blinked, showing a true dearth of wit. "Yeah, right," Yeah, it's healthy. John had them going now. From her corner of the room, Cynthia giggled. John was leading the way, and the others followed suit. Her husband was setting a tone, relaxed and in control. Are those English accents? The most inane question yet. But George handled it nicely. It's not English, he commented, as if the query were insightful due to their distinct northern dialect. It's Liverpudlian, you see. The Liverpool accent is, Paul ported on, though he had little scouse to his name. The way you say some of the words, you say grass instead of grass. And well, that sounds a bit American, so there you go. Now, Liverpool is a third reporter began, but Ringo cut across him with a wide grin. It's the capital of Ireland, he cried. Everyone laughed. But though the Beatles chuckled congenially, it wasn't as funny as it was accurate.
Well, Scott, wow.
Yeah, that was, I think, the first press conference they had after they landed in New York. And that was a lot of fun.
Wow.
Thank you.
It is nothing short of impressive. Absolutely. And the writing for this book is spectacular, and Scott brings it to life. And really, I hope that everybody will treat themselves to falling out of the current situation of life and go to 1963 and 64 and experience what was happening with the Beatles and John, and let Scott take you away into Jude's world. It's just magical. If you don't mind, Scott and
Yes.
Jude, tell everyone how to get the audiobook. It should be simple, and it is simple, but I think some of us are getting to where nothing is simple anymore. It is just, I don't even know how to turn on my TV sometimes. So
I know what you mean. We tried to make this as easy to do as possible. So rather than going exclusively through Audible, which quite a lot of people do nowadays, we wanted to make sure it was available just about everywhere. So yes, it's available through Audible. You can get it either a la carte or via subscription. You can also get it through Spotify. And even if you have a subscription, you do still need to buy the book separately. But it also means, again, you don't need to have a subscription to Spotify in order, or at least a premium subscription. Everything's free to sign up for. You can get an account with any platform that streams audiobooks online for you or downloads them for you to listen to, absolutely free. You do have to pay for the audiobook, but the service is always free. So you don't have to sign up for a subscription only. I think the only exception is Scribed, where that's subscription for everything that they do. But you can find us on Spotify, Audible, Chirp is a really good independent one, Libro FM, Chirp audiobooks. Libro.fm supports independent bookstores. So if you have a favorite bookstore, hey, they get a cut of the money in addition to us, just for getting the audiobook. So it's a great way to support local stores if you still read books as well. And we certainly hope that you do. Jude, where else is it available from that you've had feedback?
Yeah, Nook, Hobo, which is Walmart. I highly recommend Chirp because it's so easy to use, and you can set a timer if you want to go to sleep while you're listening to it. Set it for 30 minutes. It'll stop at 30 minutes. It's easy to fast forward or to which I have to do because I do fall asleep, rewind it and then replay it. You just push a button and it rewinds. It is, it's really easy to use, but there are over 40 different sites where you can download the book. And here's the deal. You won't be surprised when I say it's a 33 hour book and it's selling for about $16. That's 50 cents an hour of great entertainment that, as Lena says, will take you away. We cannot advertise and we want to advertise. We are waiting and wishing and wanting to advertise, but we can't until we get some reviews. So all of you out there that are listening, please write a 1-sentence or 2-sentence short review. And then we'll be able to get some advertising going. But thanks to everyone for listening to it. I think you will love it. It's just, it does take you back to a simpler, happier time. And, you know, by 1964, the end of 64 and all through 65, the Beatles are beginning to struggle. And they are realizing that fame is not all it's cracked up to be. And that's why volume 5 is called Shades of Life, because it's a shade of what happened in 1964. It's the same thing over again, but not as exuberant, not as happy, not as joyous. It's becoming work, and it's becoming a bit of a prison of fame. But in 63, when She Loves You takes place, everything is the first time ever. Oh my gosh, look what we're getting to do. And they are zooming to the toppermost of the toppermost. And I really think that everybody would really enjoy the ride.
Wait till you hear the story just about how the Beatles recorded She Loves You. That's a story that doesn't get very much press, but it's amazing. The fact that the fans broke into the studio on the same night that they were actually recording it. And you have different minions over at EMI Studios trying to snatch all the girls before they break into the actual studio room itself where they're recording. And all that energy and infection comes through in the reading. At least I hope.
It's exciting. It's really exciting. And you'll get to listen to another sample of the audiobook at the Fest for Beatles fans. Early riser that I am going to be the early bird speaker on the main stage at the fest on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. And Scott will be there to talk about his voicing of the Beatles. And Rand has prepared a magnificent PowerPoint, and Scott reads the segment of the chapter on the Beatles landing at John F. Kennedy Airport for the first time on Friday, the 7th of February, 1964. What a chapter it is. You're going to see rare footage, videos, photos. It is going to be really exciting. And at the end, we're going to have a trivia contest and give away a bunch of prizes. We usually do 5 when we do our focal points. We're going to give away 10 or 15 prizes. It's going to be a lot of fun. And that is at the Fest for Beatles fans. So come and join this time machine back to one of the greatest days. CBS said that 7th of February, 1964 was the first day of the beginning of the second half of the 20th century. It changed everything. It changed fashion. It changed music. It changed politics. It changed women's rights. It changed everything. And you're going to get to be there for that day. So join us.
Yeah. Magical door opened only once.
Yep, it did. Scott, thank you for being with us so much.
Well, thank you. You're welcome. I enjoyed this very much, and it was great talking to both of you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely a pleasure. It is. I just can't express enough to you what a brilliant job you both have done on this piece of work, and I wish you great success. And I'm going to push it out there to all of my buddies that know and love everything about the Beatles. So don't forget, everybody, the Chicago Fest for Beatles fans next weekend, August 11th through the 13th at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago. Don't forget. And I think you can even, can't you even buy a pass to be online and watch?
Yes, you can. You can do it virtually as well.
Yes.
Although if you come, you'll get to meet Jay Bergen, and we'll be there too.
Oh.
And so I could finally
I'm gonna
meet
try.
both of my
You never know.
authors together at the same time. That's be amazing.
This is going to be great, and I wish you both great success. And
Thank you.
we are going to, anything else, Jude, that we need to cover?
Yes, Lena has been very, very sweet and gracious to say that for anyone who writes a review and lets us know, you have to let us know of the audiobook that she will give a copy of, is this the one, Lena?
Yes,
The tribute to
absolutely.
the Beatles, Recipe Records tribute to the
Absolutely.
Beatles. It's an amazing book. I should have known butter is in here. George Martini's Get Back Joe Spice Coffee, and of course, stuffed Sergeant Peppers, which are absolutely delicious. So thank you to Lena for that very offer. And thank you to Lena for being here tonight, because she has been working like a dog and continues.
Yeah,
She,
it has been a hard day's night.
she
I'm
took
telling
time
you.
to be here. Thank you. Thank you
It-
very
it-
much.
It looks a little bit like a Beatles movie in my tool shed here with some scary pieces of equipment. You don't know what could possibly happen, but thank you all for tuning in and listening to us. We love sharing with you, and appreciate everybody that watches and listens to She Said, She Said. So until we meet again, here's to food for thought, food for the soul, food for the love of rock and roll.
Hurrah and shine on.